Welcome back in. Today we're going to be discussing 6 players that I'd be looking to avoid in your upcoming fantasy draft. So remember, I don't hate players, I just hate their ADP. And I'm basing this off Fantasy Pros PPR ADP as we stand currently. So let's go ahead and get into it. First up, it's Derrick Henry, and I already know people are going to be upset with this because there is a Derrick Henry hive that lives on this website, and I totally get it. Derrick Henry's been an absolute monster in his career, but currently being drafted at RB8 or 18th overall, I just can't get on board with that in PPR format. Last season with the Titans, 64% opportunity share, 54% snap share, 16 and a half carries, 2.1 targets. He was 22nd red zone touches. He had 1,167 rushing yards, 214 receiving yards, and 12 touchdowns. But he was only 14.5 in fantasy points per game, which made him a middling RB2. And he was 22nd in expected fantasy points per game last year. He was also not very efficient. He was 41st in true yards per carry and 41st in yards created per touch. And now he goes to an offense with the Baltimore Ravens, and I think that is where people are largely excited about because you get to play next to Lamar Jackson. We know how much that helps running backs. It obviously makes them more efficient because you can no longer just focus on Derrick Henry, and I get that. But one, we've already heard John Harbaugh kind of talk about the situation and say that as much as they would love to feed Derrick Henry, and he's going to be a big part of their offense, but they're not going to overdo it, and they're not going to sit here and get him 20 plus touches per game. I think is what a lot of people think. Two other things that I do that really worry me with this offense, and one is going to be their offensive line. This Ravens offensive line is not going to be this top 10 offensive line that we're typically used to seeing. They lost a lot of players over the offseason, and Kevin Zeitler, John Simpson, Morgan Moses over the offseason. They are returning the PFF's seventh highest graded center and Tyler Lindenbaum last year. They also drafted Roger Rosengarten in the second round, who figures to be the team's starting right tackle. But Ronnie Stanley has seen a pretty steady decline since 2020's injury, and he just really hasn't been the same. So that is obviously a concern with me with this offensive line. PFF ranks 25th heading into 2024. And the other aspect here is what I always care about in terms of running back, especially one that's going inside the top 12. If I'm going to take a running back at that draft capital, they have to be involved in the passing game. And Derrick Henry is not. Derrick Henry has never been involved in the passing game in his career, and it's damn sure not going to start with Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson has never targeted running backs at a high rate. In fact, over the last 2 seasons, he is in the bottom 5 of all quarterbacks in terms of check down rate. He is right there with CJ Stroud. On top of that, the Ravens just overall don't target running backs. Last year, they were bottom 5 and targets to the running backs last year. So he's not going to see targets. He's not going to see receiving work. And so if he's not, he's going to have to score an exuberant amount of touchdowns to be able to pay this off. He scored 12 touchdowns last year. He was still on the average 14.5 fantasy points per game. I'm not saying that that's terrible, and I'm expecting some huge decline from Derrick Henry as a player, even though he is heading into his age 31 season. That's still not the reason here. The reason is I just can't get on board with a player that I don't think is going to have the same workload that he once did. I think he'll have a healthy workload, but it's going to be hard to judge on a week to week basis. I just can't, in good conscience, take a player 18th overall that just has this type of profile. If you're still here, if you haven't clicked off the video after that one, let's move on to Josh Jacobs and let's talk about RB12, 28th overall. Last season with the Raiders, he played in 13 games. He averaged 84% of the opportunities, 18 carries per game, and 4.2 targets per game. He had over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns last year, and he averaged 13.9 fantasy points per game, which made him the RB18. Now, he wasn't efficient with his touches. 3.32 yards per carry is 63rd among all running backs. He was 53rd in juke rate and 48th in breakaway run rate last year. Now, essentially, whenever he first signed with the Green Bay Packers, there was a lot of excitement around it because at the time they lost Aaron Jones. He moved on to the Minnesota Vikings, and then AJ Dillon was a free agent. So we all thought that maybe he could just be the true workhorse here, and he was going to have no competition for touches, and that has changed. Now they brought AJ Dillon back. I don't care about that. AJ Dillon has never really been a factor, and I'm not worried about AJ Dillon. Marshawn Lloyd is a player that I am concerned with, though. Marshawn Lloyd, they spent a third round pick on him. He was one of the top running backs in this class. Now, typically, I don't try to let running back cloud my judgment when it comes to this stuff, but Matt LaFleur in his career has always believed in a committee. He has never had a true workhorse back. We have to remember, this is the same coach that gave Dion Lewis 150 carries when they had Derrick Henry. Prime Derrick Henry. They had him, and he still chose to give Dion Lewis 150 carries. So with that being said, this is a player that I just don't love. There's also a ton of wide receivers here and the tight end. I don't think he's going to be seeing a ton of targets on a week to week basis. And Marshawn Lloyd is also a good pass catcher out of the backfield. So I think that is where his role is going to come in. I think Marshawn Lloyd is going to kind of play some sort of hybrid Aaron Jones role, be the pass catching back here. And I just think that hurts Josh Jacobs. So I don't love Josh Jacobs at this cost. Again, I kind of talked about some other players, but James Cook, Kenneth Walker, all running backs. I'm going to look for a running back that I would rather have ahead of Josh Jacobs, who's going in the first half of the third round. Let's keep it moving here. Let's move on to the wide receiver position. And let's talk about another wide receiver that everybody loves that I am lower on than ADP. And that's Davante Adams, wide receiver 10 or 19th overall. Now, last season, he had a 33% target share, which is absolutely elite. He was also first in market share of air yards, 10th in deep targets, second in red zone targets. Kevin, why don't you love Davante Adams? Because he only finished 15th in fantasy points per game last year, and with 103 catches, 1,100 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. He was 30th in yards per route run, 19th in yards per team pass attempt. Oh, yeah, on an offense that is going to be very low volume in terms of pass attempts per game, because this is an offense that really wants to run the ball and they really want to play good defense. And they really invested a lot in this defense with adding Christian Wilkins over the offseason. I think this defense is actually going to be a top 10 unit this season. And they went out and added target competition in Brock Bowers and it's as a top 15 pick. Now, Brock Bowers is a phenomenal tight end, phenomenal pass catching tight end, and I have no doubt is going to be involved in this offense. So there's just less targets for Davante Adams, who on a week to week basis last year was not consistent at all for people. He only had 4 weeks last year wide receiver one production. He had 5 weeks of wide receiver two production, 3 weeks of wide receiver three, and actually 5 weeks where he was not even a top 36 wide receiver for that week. And that is just not something that I can get on board with. And nothing has changed. They went out and had Gardner Minshew at quarterback. Aiden O'Connell is still there. So this offense, this ecosystem that this team is, slow paced offense. I'm just not excited about Devontae Adams' current cost. Let's keep it moving here. Let's move on to another wide receiver, actually a wide receiver that really hurts me to say this because I love Chris Olave, the player. But wide receiver 11, 22nd overall, that's a no for me, dog. Last year, he had a 25% target share, which was excellent, 8.6 targets per game. He was 12th in market share of air yards, 87 catches, 1,100 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns, 14.5 fantasy points per game, made him the wide receiver 19. Why are we drafting him at wide receiver 11, 22nd overall? Did they go out and draft a new quarterback? They must have done that. They must have got a new quarterback here. Nope, they didn't. We still have Derek Carr. Great. He's still the quarterback here. Carr finished with 3,800 passing yards and 25 touchdowns. This offense was top 10 in pass attempts. They were also top 10 in pace of play. Yet Chris Olave was still the wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game. We could argue how he was utilized. Maybe it's going to change with new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak this season, but I just don't think he has that kind of ceiling. I've seen people talk about him and say that he has less target competition this year. Does he? Does he? I mean, Michael Thomas left. He had 64 targets last year. I don't know. I just don't know if Chris Olave is going to get to a 30% target share guy, which I think that's where you would need to go to get there. And in terms of touchdowns department, like I think that number needs to rise significantly. And he's only scored 9 touchdowns over his first 2 seasons. So I love Chris Olave. And I think if they had a quarterback worth a damn, and I would love Chris Olave. I love him as a player. I think he's phenomenal. But I just don't love this offense. I think this offense is going to be worse. This offensive line might be the worst offensive line in the league, which is really bad news for Derek Carr because if he does not have time to throw the ball, it is going to be check down city to probably Alvin Kamara again. So love the player. He is my wide receiver 15, 16 right now. So let's keep it moving here. Let's move on to another wide receiver. Stefon Diggs, wide receiver 20, 39th overall. Last season with the Bills, he had a 30% target share, 9.4 targets per game, 107 catches, 1,200 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. He was 31st in yards per route run, 20th in yards per team pass attempt. But now he moves to the Texans in a very, very crowded offense. Again, people in the comments will tell me I'm crazy that he's no longer the number one wide receiver here, but I just don't think that he is. I think Nico Collins is now that guy. Nico Collins, on every single metric you can look at, was phenomenal last year with the Houston Texans. They still have Tank Dell, who got hurt over the second half of the season. Here's the thing. I think Stefon Diggs is probably going to be the number 3 wide receiver playing in the slot. I think that is where he's going to slide in within this offense. Tank Dell actually didn't play a ton in the slot last year. I don't think that's what he's going to do. I think this is going to be Stefon Diggs' role now, playing inside the slot. And I just don't think there's going to be enough targets. He's not going to see 9.4 targets this year. He's not going to see a 30% target share. Not going to happen. I think it's much more likely he comes into seeing an 18, 20% target share. And for a player who I don't think that quite has that gear and really be that deep threat, especially when you have Nico Collins, who can definitely do that, and Tank Dell, both definitely have that ability or much more likely to run that role. I think Stefon Diggs is not going to get anywhere close to 107 receptions this year. And so that being said, just can't do it. Big decline, big drop off over the second half of the season last year with the Buffalo Bills. I'm just not buying Stefon Diggs, wide receiver 20, 39th overall. If you want to take a Texas wide receiver, just take Tank Dell, who's cheaper. I think he makes way more sense. So let's move on here. Let's move over to the tight ends. And this is a pretty easy stand for me. Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, can't do it. Both of them are being drafted inside the top 30. Their ADP is way too high compared to their tight ends. When we talked about, years past drafting like a Travis Kelce in the late first, early second, is because he was putting up true wide receiver one numbers. Neither one of these guys did that last year. Sam Laporta, while he finished the tight end one overall, he only averaged 14.1 fantasy points per game, which was tight end three. Kelce was actually the tight end one, averaging 14.6 fantasy points per game. Now, this is Travis Kelce's lowest total since 2016. The Chiefs have way more target competition this year with the additions of Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy. But last year, we saw a drop off in routes. He finished eighth in routes run, ninth in route participation, with a 24.7% target route per route run rate. And this was with MVS, Kadarius Toney, Rashee Rice, Sky Moore, Justin Watson. The wide receiver room is definitely way more upgraded than it was last year. I think the trend continues. They're going to limit Travis Kelce in terms of his routes and everything else because they want to keep him healthy throughout the entire season into the playoffs because that is obviously way more bigger of a goal for them. And so I just think Travis Kelce is not going to continue to see this type of workload. I don't think he sees a 25% target share again this year. Why draft these guys whenever you can take Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson, like all those tight ends, I would rather take at cost because of the value that they're going to be able to provide, especially something like Trey McBride, Andrews, and Kincaid, and Pitts. I think all four of those guys, I think, offer the same upside that Sam Laporta and Travis Kelce does. And honestly, you could really make an easy case for Dalton Kincaid as he's probably the number one target earner within their offense. And you can't say that about Sam Laporta. It's obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then you have Travis Kelce now, who can probably still make that case, but they just have way more target competition with Rashee Rice, who's probably not going to get suspended, Xavier Worthy, and Hollywood Brown. So I just can't get on board with taking those guys as top 30 options. That being said, let me know in the comment section below why I'm wrong. We can have a debate. We can talk about it. Love to have a conversation in the chat. So let me know. Hit that like and subscribe button for future content. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.